So I've heard many different explanations of target value delivery for projects. And quite frankly, most of them left me wondering, how in the world does that improve project performance? So I went to the authority on the subject. This guy right here on the call, who needs another guy who needs a little introduction, and that's Glenn Ballard. Glenn is an accomplished educator, author, public speaker. He's currently a member of the Construction Industry and Management Program faculty at UC Berkeley. He's a former research director of the Project Production Systems Laboratory at UC Berkeley. Glenn has an MBA in Operations Management from Holy Names College in Oakland and a PhD in Civil Engineering from the University of Birmingham in the UK. So Glenn, look forward to setting the record straight on what the world target value delivery is all about. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Okay, you're sharing your screen. It's in the notes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You might want to
I'll
put
it in
slideshow version and go from there.
There it goes. Is that all right?
We got you.
Okay. Okay, this is a short presentation of a whole book that's coming out later this year. And it's even a little bit truncated from the paper that's behind it for this PPI event. But what I want to focus on is really explaining what target value delivery is. And that's basically setting targets for project delivery and steering the project towards those targets. Okay. Now I think it's a pretty important piece. It's not everything, but it is an important piece of project delivery. So the book provides more information about the history of TVD, including its origin in manufacturing and then its transition to construction with BP's Project Andrews in the early 1990s. But that's a story for another day. So I'm going to keep my notes in front of me so I don't skip anything really critically important. So how to set value and cost targets. And of course, they're intertwined, right? You don't want to set cost and value targets that are not integrated one with another. And a key presupposition of TVD, as you can see on the screen, is that target value can be set prior to design based on the objectives for the project. And value targets are what are needed for achieving those objectives. Okay? And a second key presupposition is that an allowable cost can be set based on expected benefits from hitting value targets. And maybe it's just I've been thinking about this too long, but these seem to me to be common sense, but not very much common in practice. So the next thing to think about, or the first thing to think about, is how do you specify what's wanted, right? And so the first thing is to develop a functional program, and the ingredients of that are listed here. I won't go into them in great detail, but basically functional outcomes, the qualitative requirements, right? Say you want what percentage uptime, achieves lead goal, right? And the more specific and concrete, the better. And then consideration of external conditions and irreducible uncertainty. It can be perhaps mitigated, but it can't be eliminated, right? Those kinds of things. So, and then how do you get to an allowable cost once you have what's wanted? You have an agreement about what's wanted. And what I'm proposing is that that's done through development of a facilities program that delivers the functional program, right? So that's what this third key presupposition concerns, right? Then once you have that facilities program, think of it as a building information model or a project information model, and you can cost that model, right, if it's sufficiently detailed. And of course, that's what's needed. And we started this research back at the University of California, Berkeley's Project Production Systems Laboratory in, I think, 2016. And I've been working with a number of people from around the world. And this is what I'm reporting is what's found, and that's what's presented more completely in the book that's coming out later this year. So let's look at, so the facility program is, and I'm thinking about buildings here, although I believe that what I'm describing to you is applicable to all types of projects, perhaps with some modifications. But what's been published so far in its applications is about buildings. So that's what I'm talking about here. So spatial program and qualitative requirements, and then the external conditions and irreducible uncertainty within that context. And it's important to note that the facility, this is a quote from the book, it's important to note that the facility program is still design independent. While there may be sketches or massing diagrams to support the concepts and quantification of the facility program, they are not intended to be design solutions. So here, one of the groups that's been, or companies that's been involved is the Hattila Group out of Helsinki, Finland. And this is, again, a quote from the book: "What's wanted, target values, and the cost of providing what's wanted, target cost, are determined prior to design by creating through simulation a model of the building from the voice of the customer, then costing the materials, components, and services needed to construct that building." Right? And it's not, I'm just using them as one example. We've discovered multiple instances around the globe of companies that are able to do this. So, and here's an important piece. The simulation model is fully detailed, buildable, and capable of supporting desired functions at desired capacities, but it's not what will be constructed, leaving designers free to create designs that deliver target values or greater values within or less than the target cost. Right? And the secret, of course, to that is that there can be many, many different designs that deliver the same types of functionality, but they can be over a wide range of costs. Right? So we're trying to control that cost dimension by providing sufficient money, but then providing incentives to reduce that cost if possible. And this, I won't go through this, but this is a process diagram for that whole front-end process, project definition process, getting from what do I want to setting value and cost targets and funding the project. If you have questions about this that we have time for in the discussion period, I'd be glad to answer them. Okay, so how is design steered to project value cost targets? And I'm focusing on design not because that's the only thing that needs steering, also construction and commissioning, but that's what I have time to talk about. So again, I'll read this. I apologize. I'll stop reading here in a minute. In TVD current best practice, once targets are set, cross-functional innovation teams create multiple alternatives for building systems and components using set-based design, and the things bolded are the tools that are used to actually steer towards targets. So then evaluate those alternatives against factors relevant for differentiating them using choosing by advantages. And that was a method developed independently of construction in the U.S. Forest Service, as it turns out, but turns out to be very, very useful. And I'll talk in more specifics about that in a minute. The total importance of advantages of each are determined, then evaluated against their cost. If none of the alternatives is found to deliver their part of target value, what is being costed, design's job is not yet done regardless of cost. If target values are achieved but at greater than target cost, designers continue striving for ways to achieve target values at lower cost using value engineering methods. Okay, first of all, the organizational structure that has proven to be most effective in steering, that is delivering the project. And so this is, again, obviously from a building perspective, but design these innovation teams, I'm borrowing that term from the Bolt Company, which is one of the leaders in this area. are cross-functional teams that consist, I'll give you an example for structural. So the structural team would have the structural engineer, the structural detailer, the structural fabricator, and the structural erector. Right? And they would also have within them, every one of these teams has internal estimating capability. So for fast estimating of alternatives, and or they're typically the construction manager, architect, or design lead, whatever that is, and the owner or participants in these different teams. And they, of course, can work together when they're talking, making decisions, or considering options that concern one or another of the teams on the project. Set-based design is really it's best perhaps understood in opposition to point-based design, which is consists in kind of making an early decision and then trying to maintain it despite all the bumps that come down the road, especially if you don't engage people downstream, stakeholders and different engineering disciplines and construction and users ahead of time. And so set-based design includes that component of inclusion and also stresses developing multiple alternative designs for processes and products, and then choosing by advantages to make selections from those alternatives. This is the basic steps involved in this process called choosing by advantages. And you can see identify alternatives, define factors, define must and won't have criteria for each factor, and so on. And this is perhaps the most important. Key features of CBA are that factors aren't weighted, right? You don't really know what the relevance of a factor is for a set of options until you have those options defined. Evaluation is deferred until there's agreement about how each alternative satisfies those requirements, okay? And that's what we found is that if you're engaging multiple stakeholders, people that have in companies, organizations that have a stake in the decision, and they tend to be able to more easily and readily come to consensus if they first agree on the how you describe each of the alternatives in play before you start considering evaluation. And then cost is deferred until the advantages offered by each alternative can be assessed. Because really the question of cost is, if you don't know what you're getting, you can't make a very good decision. So here, I apologize for the size of this, but this is one taken from practice. And what you see is they have 5 alternative structural designs assessed against 8 factors, okay? And those factors really concern feasibility of MEP construction, floor plan, modifications of floor plan, future program changes, right? And then buildings, the factor is building seismic drift. And seismic drift is the extent to which a building shifts off center, right, bends, if you will, against earthquake forces, seismic forces. And interestingly, and then other factors, proprietary technology, risk of field inspection delay, a little bit more familiar ones, and familiarity with system. If you can see the process of choosing by advantages eventually has the team, the group making the decision, assess the total importance of advantages of each of the alternatives being considered. And in this case, the greatest total importance of advantages was 235 for the right-hand most option, right? And 215 was the second largest. Okay. But if you look at the cost line, which is the bottom line, the one at the 235, the biggest advantage was purchasable at a cost of $2,258,170. But for slightly less than just 215 out of 235, you could get it for $1,888,29. Okay, so it's more than a half difference. And so the recommendation was made to the management team to choose number 4, alternate 4, with a total importance of advantages of 215, despite being subordinate. Okay. All right. So value engineering, I mentioned value engineering, and I know that value engineering in most places in the industry has a bad name because it's been misused, mostly by having designs developed and then critiqued, as opposed to incorporating the value engineering critiques into design development. Right? But I want to introduce here this notion of types of reasoning. So deduction, deduction and induction are pretty well understood. So deduction, drawing a conclusion from accepted premises, and induction, determining a property of a class of objects from samples. But I want to introduce 2 more, which kind of go in different directions. So, but they're tightly related. So regression answers the question, what provides X? And if you remember what we said, we went from a functional program to a facilities program. That's done by asking and answering that question by regression. What provides the functionalities and characteristics, qualitative characteristics that are desired for the project to be considered successful? And regression typically moves by looking first at, well, what do we know? What do we know that answers the question? Then we might expand it to say, well, what's known and knowable outside of what we know? And then if those things all fail, there's not an adequate answer, then you have to invent one. And the process of invention is called abduction. That's a type of reasoning. And that's inventing something new that may meet understood needs or create new ones. Okay? And so abduction and regression and abduction, or all of these occur in the design process, but regression and abduction are critically important. So conclusions, using TVD has resulted in better buildings being delivered more safely, more efficiently, and faster. Of course, I haven't shown you the data for that, but there is data. Cross-functional innovation teams are required for effective TVD, hence design, bid, build contracts are excluded. It just doesn't work. Waste is unexploited potential for improvement. TVD provides the framework for exploiting that potential. Innovation teams, set-based design, choosing by advantages, and value engineering provide the methods for realizing that potential. So here's some recommendations. And first of all, a question, should all projects use TVD? Does TVD apply to industrial and infrastructure projects? And remember that the process of TVD was developed in manufacturing. And so it's identifiable as far back as Henry Ford. And certainly, and even by Volkswagen in Germany in developing the first people's car. And then, of course, it was used in World War II, in arms production, and by all the combatants, as far as we can tell. Right? And then subsequently skipped over into construction. And as I mentioned, it was a major project. Major breakthrough was by then called British Petroleum in the North Sea, where the existing technology for recovery was beginning to peter out relative to the money that could be made in using it. And so they decided to change the way they did the project. And so the radical relationships, contractual terms, incentivization, everything really for the sake of encouraging collaboration and invention, abduction. Right? And they produced that project. It was an offshore rig. They delivered it 6 months early. Oh, they delivered gas, oil from the rig 6 months early, which is, of course, a substantial amount of money. And they reduced the cost against what would have been expected by more than half, right? So, but then that went, oh, I hope I have time for this. That went on shore with Brown and Root in offshore projects in Australia. And then in the 2000 Olympics was coming up, and they had left it late. And so they decided to use that same approach, that same strategy for cleaning up the bay, Sydney Harbor, which was pretty much a cesspool. And it worked so well that subsequently, and they changed the name to Project Alliancing, and that became a basis for integrated project delivery in the United States. So it's all wound together. So intense collaboration is needed. I mentioned that Project Alliancing and integrated project delivery, we do have lots of data about their being effective in persuading owners of participating companies to allow their employees to collaborate. Obviously, because doing so improves all companies' financial outcomes. However, there are a number of other options, including fully integrated companies using preferred suppliers. Traditional positive and negative incentives have worked, even in some projects in which I've been personally involved. So there needs to be more research done to clarify, well, how do you provide the minimum requirement for collaboration? And then collect and analyze comparative performance data on TVD and non-TVD projects. That's not really been done. That's it. So I look forward to your questions and comments, and it's your turn.
All right. Maybe you could stop sharing your presentation so we can see your face a little more clearly. There we go. Okay. So we got a question for you. Is there a role for targets that are as much as possible beyond this minimum, in quotes, as opposed to a specific numerical target? Might hard targets inhibit unexpected creativity, or even worse, gaming by holding something back to improve variable payment under an IPD gain share?
Let's see. Well, I'm not sure I'm understanding everything about it, but the focus when TVD came into the construction industry, subsequent to BP's work, it came with a lean proviso of continuous improvement, and so typically projects are set with the desire to hit something or exceed, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's always a focus, and if the companies involved are benefiting financially from doing better, then they're incentivized to do it. So I think the incentive goes in the right direction.
Okay. Another good question here, and maybe you've already answered it in the way you talked about bid build. What type of changes should be made if public owners want to implement TVD? I'm talking about the current public bidding regulations that are focused on appointing the lowest bid and the fragmentation amongst the project delivery phases.
I know. We've been actually working on that around me and many other people around the world. And there was a project. So I formed something called Lean in Public Sector Construction, right? And back in 2007, I think. And in 2009, we had a conference in Karlsruhe, Germany. And the Germans were really aghast at what we were proposing because they really liked the way it worked, right? The big companies. But the Finnish Transport Agency had a group of people there. I think there were 3 of them. And they went back home and started applying what we said, right? Mm-hmm. Applying this approach. And it was wildly successful. and it's infected the whole country and then beyond. And now I'm told that Germany is finally starting. They're doing their first project. So, and I know what I was wanting to say. Sorry. So in the Finnish case, one of their projects was there was a challenge posed to the project contract award to the European Commission, and they said it was illegal. And the European Commission said, no, it's not illegal. Right? and so they all use, and the kind of standard contracting practice is to do a kind of a best value procurement, so that you have points awarded for capability. You're really considering capability for doing the job and then you winnow that down to companies that are more or less capable, and see, you may still be able to make some differentiation there, but then you consider cost, right?
Okay. See, another question for you. The choosing by advantages cost that you had on that table that we couldn't read very well.
Yeah.
Now, that's the cost there are not just the specific components involved, like the structural steel or whatever. It's the total knock-on effect of that concept on the total project cost. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah. No, it is the cost of that component, but that cost has to be within, there would be some stipulation about, there would be a preliminary or application of budget to different components, right? And so if they exceed that allocation, then you would be a problem. So in that sense, it does take into account the knock-on effect on the whole. Right? And so if you didn't have any solutions that were within the allocated target cost for that system, then you would have to, your design isn't complete. Right?
Okay. And then one more quick question, and we've got to move on. Okay. In that string of decision-making logic, there was an allowable cost step.
Right.
Does it matter if that number is fantasy? And let me explain why I'm asking the question. And it
matters hugely, and that's one of the problems in doing shared risk and reward. Yeah. Is that if the client is not revealing about what the actual costs are and what they're able and willing to pay, then you can't make a deal out of that.
So it says stop if
exactly
no cost is fantasy.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, thank you, Glenn. And when do we see your book?
I don't have an exact date. We've sent the manuscript off to the publisher, and I should have a date within the next couple of weeks.
Great.
But I'm expecting it before the end of the year.
Okay. Super. Well, thanks again for your time to summarize this for us and share your thoughts.
Thank you.
All right.